right, it looks like I have to speak up a little bit louder. There we go. Thank you all for being here this morning. How was this morning's session? That's awesome. Very good. Well, we're really excited to have you all here. I personally am I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Karina Villa. I'm a state representative in the 49th district, which includes DuPage, Kane County, as well as a little bit of Cook. So this is kind of my neighborhood here. So just to jump right into the conversation, I know we're a little bit late. We want to be aware of everyone's time, and the thing that's most important to us is to make sure that we're going to get to your questions. So I think all of you should have paper where you'll be able to fill something out if you have any questions for us. So just to get us started, the United States Constitution sets forth a requirement that everyone living in the United States should be counted every 10 years. It is through this active participation in the census that billions of dollars are provided to communities. I don't know if you all know, but the last census in 2010, Illinois was undercounted by approximately 22%. 22%, which meant a loss of billions of dollars for us for critical services, medical services, education, and construction. Many different parts of services that we need were not given to us because of the fact that we were so undercounted. So as a member of the Latino Caucus, I'm really proud to say that the census has been the #1 priority for us as legislators, as well as the Latino Caucus Foundation. It is our #1 topic that we have really wrapped around and rallied for. Every single one of the caucus members stood together and united to make sure that we received legislation that was fair and that was going to be able to count all of the hard to count communities, because you know that the Latinos are not just in the city of Chicago, they're out by me in DuPage County as well. And in other parts of the state. So we have to make sure that everyone is counted. So that's why when I was asked to moderate this session, I was very excited to be able to do that, because this topic is very near and dear to my heart. So without further ado, the beginning part of the session, we're going to talk basic Census 2020. And after that, my esteemed colleague, Representative Villanueva, will be up here moderating after a brief break, where we'll talk about the longer term mission, which is redistricting. So if we can just start off with maybe just a brief introduction of everyone on the panel, and then we'll get right to it.
I don't know how it turns out. Or should I just introduce myself before I speak, and her too? Maybe that'd be easier. Awesome, welcome everybody. So my name is Julie Dowling. I'm a professor in the Latino Studies Department at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, just down the road. A little about me and how I came to doing this kind of stuff. I am originally from Texas. My mom is Mexican-American from the Rio Grande Valley. My dad was Irish-American from here in the Midwest. And so I ended up studying Latinos in the land of my Irish ancestors. So I live in Urbana-Champaign and do work on the census. My first book was about census and racial classification issues. And then I'm actually doing work right now on trust and government, how people feel about filling out the census form given the age of Trump that we're in right now, and people's feelings about government trust, et cetera. So I'm working on those kinds of issues now. I'm on the National Advisory Committee for the Census Bureau, so I'm currently chairing that committee through the 2020 census as we deal with all of these kinds of issues. Okay, so I'm gonna start out pretty basic here, because I understand we also have like students and folks in the room for who might this be an introduction to talking about census in the first place. So why is this census important in the first place? As the representative just mentioned, allocation of federal funding in Illinois, even 1% undercount will result in the state losing $19 million per year for a decade, resulting in a total of $195,500,000, a lot, basically a lot of money, right? So a whole lot of money will be lost if we don't have an accurate count for 2020. This will affect the number of seats that Illinois gets in Congress, and it will also affect redistricting and representation, which our other panelists will be talking about shortly. So the census, we're talking about it now. When is it going to be happening? This is going to be the first census that you're able to do online. which is both really great in terms of access, but there are also certain communities who have less access to internet, such as racial ethnic minorities, people who don't have, economic means to be able to afford the internet. So in March, you're going to be receiving postcards that will tell you how to go online and fill out your census form. After multiple, I think it's 3 of these basically mail-outs, if you still haven't gone online to fill out your census form, you'll get a paper questionnaire. So that would be an important thing to mention for those of you who are representatives to your constituents, is that a paper form will eventually come, and some of the research has shown that some racial minorities, including Latinos, are less likely to want to fill it out online. So there's access, and there's also lack of comfort and trust of doing it online. So the paper form will come. You could also do it by phone if you call in the number. That's another important thing in terms of messaging to get out there to your constituents. So April 1st is considered to be Census Day, and the form asks questions like, who is living in your household on April 1st? And so, again, messaging in terms of getting people to fill out their form on or by April 1st. After April, in May, the non-response follow-up starts to happen. So that's when you see people coming to your doors, knocking on your doors, basically, and basically asking you your census information if you haven't filled it out by then. That's also an important thing to impart on people, is to try to fill this out sooner rather than later, especially, again, in this age where we have people afraid to open their door sometimes because of ICE, et cetera, like being able to be sure that you fill out your census form as completely as possible before that date. So the census has a website online that has an app called Roam, and so if you go to census.gov/Roam, you can look at this tool. It's really kind of neat, and you can actually click on your particular areas and counties and districts and look at basically what is the percentage of people who responded, which groups basically did not respond in your community in 2010, and that can help you target. They will also have live updates on there as to how responses are happening for your communities, so you can look at who is responding and who isn't, and what areas you want to focus on for your communities. So this will be a really important tool during the 2020 census. So in terms of messaging, something to get out there to your constituents will be focusing on the benefits in terms of resources and representation. If you don't fill out this form, you undercut your communities. You lose funding, and you lose political representation that are really important. Another important messaging issue will be assuring people that Title 13, which was basically enacted after there were abuses in the past in terms of releasing of census data, et cetera, Title 13 now protects that data. And so the Census Bureau cannot share your information with immigration, with the IRS, with anyone else. Data can come in, but it cannot come out. This is a little bit confusing for people because right now we have in the news all the stuff about the DMV records and Census getting access to DMV records per Trump's request to get that citizenship information that he wanted, and so the DMV giving them information, people are then confused and think, wait, they're sharing information with the DMV, but it's a one-way in and no out when it comes to Census. So Census is not allowed to give your information out. They're allowed to receive information from places, but not to pass that out. So that's an important distinction to let people know. There's not going to be a citizenship question. Thank goodness. There's not going to be a citizenship question there, and so also imparting that on people, because there are still people, because it keeps blipping in the news, right, about the DMV stuff, who are afraid the citizenship question is going to be there. Filling out the census as completely as possible will reduce the risk of you having someone come to your home, and we all know nobody wants them coming to your home, right? And so that's another important thing to impart on the people that are living in your districts. So who are the hard to count, and why are we so concerned? So there is an undercount, a big undercount in Illinois, and then disproportionately we have undercounts for Latinos, racial minorities, immigrants, et cetera. What makes groups hard to count? Well, if you think about it this way, the most easy people for us to count are people who have a stable residence, right? So you have a person who owns a home, and they're more middle class and more educated, and they know about the census. That's your easy target base for getting to fill out the form. Everyone who doesn't fit that profile is harder to count. If you are young and single and moving around, if you're renting and so you're moving around, right? If you're somebody who is a racial minority, right, and you may not trust the government with your information. If you're an immigrant, similarly not trusting the information and providing that to the government. If you are homeless, if you are undocumented and are afraid to give your information to the government. Also, people are less likely to list children. So there was a dramatic undercount of children in the 2010 census. Almost 1 million children missed in 2010. A lot of those, 400,000 300,000 of those were Latino children. And so we're really working on outreach in terms of getting people to understand that counting young children is really important, not to leave off the babies, basically. So these are some of the things that make it more difficult to count people in these communities. So Latinos specifically, as one of us, I think Omar Aquino mentioned in his opening remarks this morning, make up 17 to 18% of the Illinois population, the largest population in Illinois after non-Hispanic whites. And this combination of factors that I've mentioned make Latinos particularly hard to count. Just to highlight again, immigrants have limited English proficiency, which makes it more difficult to fill out forms. You have to request it in Spanish, et cetera. Lower income persons who rent and live in multiple family households. So because our community has a higher number of people with abuelas and tias and tios all living in the same house, right? People may not know that you're supposed to count everyone who lives there and not just your nuclear family, right? There also may be fears people have sometimes about, well, on my apartment lease, I only have these certain people, right? But I really have a whole bunch of other people living here that I don't want my landlord to know about. So maybe I won't list that on here because it's unofficial, right? But the Census Bureau is not talking to your landlord, and they're not going to share that information with them. And so making sure people know that they need to list everyone who lives there, not just the people who are officially on the lease, et cetera. Lower income persons who rent and live in multiple family households, as I mentioned, highly mobile, and again, this issue of the younger demographic. We have a younger population as Latinos as a whole, right, with a lot of children and young people. And so when we miss the younger population, such as we had in 2010, that's a larger percentage of Latinos who are missed. So there are also current issues, in addition to the usual stuff that we've had with the census, these issues of economics, high mobility, immigrant populations. There's also our current political climate, with a lot of anti-Latino sentiments that are coming from our current administration. So the increasing anti-Latino sentiments, increasing anti-immigrant sentiments, and a growing distrust of government. In the 1960s, something like 75% of people in this country trusted the government. Anyone want to guess what that percentage is now? Well, on a recent survey in 2019, it was 17%. I think that's probably even an overestimate, right? So basically, we have a lot of distrust in government. We currently have impeachment hearings. So, basically, we have a lot of people not feeling super comfortable with the government. And because in the news, we had an association between Census and the Trump administration for a year and a half, people are linking Census to that administration in a way that, it has not been in the past, right? Linked to that kind of it's a bipartisan count of everyone, right? It's not supposed to be politicized in that way, but it was basically during this whole time period, okay? And then, of course, fear of deportation for immigrants, which has been in the past, but is especially now given our current political climate. So in addition to these issues, I wanted to highlight two sort of extra things here that come to be challenges when we talk about the Latino population. So the citizenship question, which I've just talked about in the aftermath of that, and the whole race and Hispanic origin issue. So on the 2010 census and in the previous 3 decades, we've had separate questions for the Latino-Hispanic question and a race question. And there's a whole history to this that would take me like an hour to explain. So we're just gonna, if anyone has questions, talk to me about that afterwards, about why this actually is. But there's a separate question that says, are you Latino, Hispanic, Spanish origin? And then a race question with no option for us. Right? White, black, well, unless you are someone who identifies as an Afro-Latino or white Latino, right? But basically, white, black, American Indian, Alaska Native, various Asian origin groups, and some other race. Approximately half of Latinos will mark that they are white in the census for the last few decades, and the other half will say that they are some other race and write in Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Latino, Hispanic, raza cosmica, like whatever they want to put in there for themselves under the race sort of box. And this has been an issue, because a large percentage of people will simply not fill out the race question, leading to incomplete forms and possible follow-up from people coming to your door asking or calling you, asking for your responses. There's an interesting thing I like to point out when I put this up that doesn't relate specifically to Latinos, but we also have no Middle Eastern category, and we were hoping to have that for 2020 as well. So we were hoping to fix this question, to add a Middle Eastern one, and to add a Latino Hispanic option for 2020. We had a change in administration, and that didn't exactly end up happening, right? And so for now, we still will have these sort of separate questions. And something else I'd like to highlight is that in the current format that we had in 2010 and before, we don't ask white and black people where they're from. Take a look at the form, right? We ask Latinos where they're from, we ask Asian groups where they're from, but we just kind of assume that white and black people are from here. That's kind of messed up, right? Because white people immigrated here, unless you're Native American or were brought here as a slave, you were an immigrant basically at some point. And black people can be from a wide range of places, not simply African American. So why are we just assuming that white and black people have no ethnic origins, national origins attached to them, right? So given that issue and the lack of a representation category there for Latinos and for Middle Eastern people, they wanted to make some changes to census in 2020. So I already mentioned that right there. So 13% of Latinos didn't answer the race question in 2010, and 37% input other race, right? So that's half of Latinos said, I don't fit in the racial boxes that you provided, right? And said that. So multiple studies have shown also that when Latinos check a box on there, because there's no box for them, it doesn't actually mean something to them. So my own book was about how 2/3 of Latinos in Texas said they're white, but they're not actually white. It's like a defensive whiteness. It's like, I'm gonna check white to tell you I'm an American citizen so that you stop profiling me and pulling me over near the border, but it's not about them actually being white. So we had very bad data that comes out racially for Latinos based on categories that don't include a category for them, right? So there's testing that was done for years. We have spent over a decade, the Census Bureau, testing a better way to ask about race that would have an option that would fit Latinos, that would decrease this non-response for Latinos to the race question, and they would also give Middle Eastern people a chance to fill something out for themselves who didn't feel that they fit into the categories that were already there. This was the format that was supposed to be for 2020. This is what the Census Bureau wanted. There were advocacy groups all over, from NALEO to MALDEV to Urban League. All of these groups put forward and advocated and wanted this particular format that you see here. Notice how white people have ethnic options here, right? There's the 6 major groups for white ethnics here. There's Latinos, basically. I'm running out of time. Yes, okay, I'm gonna speed up really fast. I'm a good fast talker. Okay, so different Latino groups, and it was kind of a check all that apply format. So you can also be white and Latino or black and Latino. You can check everything that matters for you without having it be a separate sort of non-race response. Unfortunately, again, we had an election and a change in administration, and we didn't get to have the question format that we wanted. So what are we gonna have in 2020? The same kind of format as we had before. So your constituents are gonna see this form when it comes in the mail, you personally and your constituents. Are you Latino, Hispanic? Followed by the race question. We did get ethnic options for whites and blacks. They didn't need approval from OMB to be able to institute that, and so that is going to be on there. So we will count ethnic origins for white and black people, but we will not be seeing an option here for Latino, Hispanic. So in conclusion, as I see her hovering back next to me, in conclusion, many Latinos will still struggle to answer that race question. And you may get questions, from people about how do I answer this format? They can answer it however they want to. You can mark other and just write in your response, basically. Citizenship will not be there, but it's going to be an issue still, because it was in the media for a year and a half. So in your constituencies, in your groups, focus on Latinos, other immigrants, low-income racial minorities, children, especially young children, and these other hard-to-count groups, and keep track of that on Rome and see how your communities are doing. That's what I got. All right.
Great. So please write down your questions that you might have for Dr. Dowling. And now, Lisette, if you'd like to.
It's on.
Oh, there we go. So she'll go ahead and introduce herself and take it away.
Awesome. I feel like I have nothing to add. Great. And my apologies in advance. I'm trying to overcome a cold. This is my second state in 1 week, but we'll press through. Lisette Escobedo, I am the director of the National Census Program at the NALEO Educational Fund. Can you hear me okay? I'm gonna try to project, but it's really hard. Yes, it's on. Can you hear me okay now? Yeah. Okay. Sorry if I get someone sick because I'm keeping it close. Okay, good. Again, Lisette Escobedo, Director of the National Census Program at the NALEO Educational Fund. I am headquartered in Los Angeles, California, born and raised there, but have been traveling the country since January. So I've been to pretty much most states at this point. This is my second census with the NALEO Educational Fund. I worked on the 2010 census, running our Yes Hora campaign, focusing specifically on engaging Latinos through the naturalization process, making sure that legal permanent residents become citizens, and then making sure that they turned out to vote with Yes Hora Ve y Vota. And then they said, hey, you've already done the other two, why not do census as well? So I did the Yes Hora Hágase Contar work. After that work, I left for about 10 years to do a bunch of other work with labor unions. I ran for office in my hometown to become the first Latina city councilwoman in the city of Whittier. I fell short, 4 votes, sorry. Hold your claps. But we'll get it at some point. And so 10 years later, when my CEO approached me and asked me if I wanted to come back to NALEO to work on V2 of census, I decided to accept, specifically because we had the whole issue of the citizenship question basically up on this fight. And so I decided to come back, and I came back in January, and since then, I've pretty much helped launch our Hágase Contar campaign across the country. I started in January, we launched in April, and I hired my full team of about 20 just this past week. So we are up and running. So I like to consider myself kind of this quasi census nerd. I love the census, everything census. If you follow me on Instagram, that's all you will see. This quasi of census nerd, organizer, and communicator. Communications is my background, but I love politics, I love census, and I love helping my community. And so I'm going to talk to you all a little bit just about some of our work in terms of reaching the hard-to-count Latino communities. The Naleo Educational Fund is part of a national coalition of organizations with the Leadership Conference, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the National LGBTQ Task Force, and in essence, we focus specifically on the Latinx community across the country. We look into what are the resources, what is the type of information, what is the research that we need to reach our communities, and so what we decided to do is in essence in April launch this campaign, Hágase Contar. One of the things that we saw in 2010 was the need to educate our communities, our parents, our educators on the importance of counting Latino children. So in 2010, we missed about 1 million children. Out of those 1 million, guess how many were Latino children? 40%. 400,000 of those who were not counted or left off the forms were Latino children. Guess where those Latino children are concentrated in the state of Illinois? Cook County. So your highest concentration is in Cook County. And so what we decided to do is when we started looking at our campaign work is in 2010, again, we did our overall Yes Hora Hágase Contar campaign. And this time we thought, hey, we need a separate campaign just for this work. This is a daunting effort. One of the things that we noticed wasn't the fact that families were not filling out the form. It was the fact that children were specifically left off the form. And usually it was because of lack of information, misinformation, or just not having access to the resources to know this. And so in 2020, we decided to launch our sub-campaign, which is Hazme Contar. And my apologies because I didn't bring those buttons, but you do have the Hágase Contar buttons out there. And the specific focus of our Hazme Contar work is to work with school board members, educators, parents, to really inform them about the fact that every single child in the household must be counted and not left off the form. And so we've coupled that with our Hágase Contar campaign, and that's how we've been traveling the country. In terms of our Hágase Contar campaign, we have a couple of layers to that. So one is making sure that our community has access to accurate and comprehensive information on the census. One of the things that we're realizing is the misinformation or the lack of comprehensive information on the census. We are engaging recently in a set of national surveys and focus groups. And one of the things that we realized is that when we said the statement that every person in the United States must be counted, most of the Latinos in those focus groups and surveys agreed. But when we went down the line as to asking them whether undocumented folks should be counted and whether children should be counted, it was completely split. There was a lot of folks who were actually undocumented who said that undocumented folks should not be counted in the census. And so there's a lot of lack of information. So our Hágase Contar work is specifically focusing on making accessible information available to our communities. We do this through a couple of ways. One, we do have what you would sort of call a ground game where we have regional organizers. We have organizers in Arizona, California, Florida, Texas, North Carolina, New York. And then for the other states like the Midwest, I have my national team, and so I come here and do some of the work. And in those areas, we also develop partnerships. As you all will know, and once we get in depth to the conversation, we do have the majority of our capacity on the ground in California. And I'm sure folks can figure out why. In California, the state legislature appropriated $187 million to census outreach. And so that allows a lot of organizations to really build the capacity and to really develop a grassroots campaign. And so the other piece of our work with elected officials, because we are the National Association of Latino Elected Officials, was working with a lot of your state legislatures, with a lot of state legislators in Colorado, in New York, in Connecticut, to pass funding for the census. We just were able to secure funding in the state of New York. And so we see this effort as kind of a multi-layered effort. How do the states support? How do we support through our ground game? How do we support through our resources and information? And how do we help support Latino elected officials? Another big piece of our Hágase Contar work is our website, hágasecontar.org. This is one of the most comprehensive bilingual websites that you'll find out there right now. And we have downloadable resources, a lot of information. The other piece of our work is that we are one of the only live national bilingual hotlines right now. So if folks dial 877 El Censo, you can speak to a live operator. They're fully trained, and they have the capacity to answer any question. They were all trained by me, so I like to think that they're very well trained. And so we do have a national bilingual hotlines where we capture actually every time zone. So we have operators in Texas, we have operators in New York, and we have operators in Los Angeles. And so one of the things to note for that is that when we were seeing a lot of these conversations spark up through the citizenship question debate, we realized that our community didn't have an outlet of where to ask questions. And so I went to my informal focus group, which is my abuelita and my mom, and I asked them questions about what they knew about the citizenship question. And so some of them said, well, you know, my abuelita was like, I guess it makes sense because they're saying that you need it for voting. And so I was like, oh, wow. We need an access point for our community. So we went from a launch date of potentially January of our hotline to moving it up to June. So we went live June 24th of this year. And so we've been ramping up. The other effort that our hotline is engaging on, that we're working on with MALDEF actually, and with Lawyers Committee and a couple of other legal organizations, is our census protection work. And so we want to make sure that when folks call into this hotline and they say, hey, someone's at my door asking me what my immigration status is, or asking me what my bank account is, or anything that might not be on the census, that we immediately flag, and that we figure out how do we work with the attorney generals from each state, how do we work with our attorney organizations, and how do we let our community know that they're protected under Title 13, but also by organizations that have the legal capacity to deploy folks to help them out. One of the things that we've realized through our research and through our messaging research and messenger research is the fact that Latinos and our Latino community trust Latino organizations. And so if we say, sure, there's this Title 13, because our community is saying, we know there's laws, but do laws matter in this administration, right? That's what we're hearing. And so one of the things that we're having to do is say, but we got your back. Right? All of us as organizations and as a coalition are fighting for you, and no matter what, we have a way for you to report, we have a way for you to feel safe, and so that's very, very, very important. And so we've really kind of adapted all of our hotline work and our field work to speak to that. Some of the other work that we've been doing, and we're going to...
Yes. Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
I could listen to these ladies speak all day, but I want to also make sure that you all have an opportunity to ask questions. Can you raise your slips if you have a slip? Do we have questions? Can we pass them to your right, please? Yes. And people will come by and collect them. So pass the slips to your right. I'm sorry that I had to cut off, but extras too, if we could get the helpers to please pass out extra blank slips. So in the meantime, while we're collecting our first round of questions, I want to just make sure to give a quick opportunity for our other two panelists who you'll be hearing from in depth in the next discussion. But I would like to give you both just an opportunity to introduce yourselves as well.
Go ahead, Grisel.
Buenos días.
My name is Griselda Vega Samuel, and I am the Regional Counsel for the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, also known as MALDEF. And I am a lawyer, a labor lawyer of over almost 20 years of experience representing low-wage workers across the state. I've worked in Washington, I've worked in New York, I also worked in Mexico and Central America, all before coming back home. So I was born and raised in Rogers Park. My family has been here for many, many years. My cousin's actually out in the audience. And really excited to be back because MALDEF, as Regional Counsel of MALDEF, and I'll get into it a little bit, MALDEF has been very involved in the census and redistricting. This is a key element, part of our work. And so I'm really excited to talk to you guys a little bit about that in a little bit.
My name is Miguel del Valle. You're cutting into my time. Thank you. And I'm here as a former legislator and the first Latino elected to the Illinois Senate in Illinois because of MALDEF. And Virginia Martinez, who is sitting in the audience, who was the regional office director when MALDEF filed the first suit. But Griselda is going to tell us a lot more about that history. But I was, prior to becoming a legislator, I was the executive director of a human services agency in the West Town Hummel Park area, Association House. Okay, I guess I better mention these names here. And then after leaving the legislature, I became the elected Chicago City Clerk. From there, I went on to become a commissioner with the Illinois Commerce Commission, served in that capacity for 5 years, and then retired, and about 6 months ago, took on the challenge of the presidency of the Chicago Board of Education. That's a volunteer position, for the record. A lot of people in the community think that it's a paid position. I said, no, I'm practically a full-time volunteer now for the Chicago Public Schools. And so that is what I'm doing these days. Thank you.
So just a quick statement about that. In 1995, I was the president of the Latino organization at the College of DuPage, and I had Senator Miguel del Valle come talk to us about census and the importance of it and redistricting and all of that. And he spoke to us with such enthusiasm. And let me just say, I'm totally fangirling being up here with him on the stage today. So yes, he was a very deserved clap that the audience received him with, for sure. Okay, so we'll jump into the questions. This is a great question because I hadn't actually heard it from anyone. So do you have any recommendations for outreach specifically targeted for our Latino elder population, particularly amongst the isolated?
Sure. So, yes. So one of the things that we're noticing is the fact that trusted messengers are really, really important. So a couple of things on that end. One, we're realizing that family members are key. And specifically when looking at Latino families, we know, and from experience, we all know this, that the younger folks in the family, sometimes the teenagers in the family, sometimes the younger son, the younger daughter are usually the folks that will fill out the census form for a lot of folks. And so, my apologies, everyone's emailing me right now. So one of the things is engaging family members and engaging families as a whole. The other piece is partnerships. So one of the things that we're doing, for example, in the state of California is we're working with SEIU 2015, which is my former employer, which represents 390,000 home care and nursing home workers. And so some of the things that we're focusing on is educating home care workers, educating, again, nursing home workers on how their folks, how older folks will be counted and making sure that they're informing them of how to fill out the form, where to fill out the form, One of the things to note that's really important is that sometimes folks will say, well, there's going to be an online form, which makes it very difficult for the elderly, right, to fill out their form because your initial first response has to, or is recommended online, right? But it is important to note that if folks don't fill out their form online, they do get up to 5 mailings, and in the 5th mailing, they will get a printed form. And so if you're working with your elderly population and they say, hey, I keep on getting this letter that has a username and a password, I don't know what to do with it, you can let them know to wait for the 5th mailing so that they can get a printed form. The other important thing to know is that they also can call in their answers, and someone can help them. So for the elderly community, again, engaging folks who are part of the family who can help them with the form. 2, making sure that you're accessing organizations that work with the elderly and are providing them information. 3, making sure that you let them know what an enumerator will and will not ask. We know that during this time, there is potential for scams amongst the elderly community where someone might come and say, hey, I'm here with the Census Bureau, can you give me your bank account information and your social security number? And so the other piece that we have to make sure and do as trusted messengers is that we let the community know what the census will and will not ask, right? The census will not ask for bank account information, social security number, immigration status, citizenship, et cetera. So it's kind of a multitude of things, partnerships being key and accurate and concise information being key as well.
Great. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, what will pretrial detainee and inmates in prisons be allowed, will they be allowed to be counted? And where, a follow-up, just an additional to that I would like to add is, where will they be counted?
College students, which is also asked here by Miguel de Valle, that college students and people who are in prisons are counted where they are, basically where they are living, basically in a dormitory or in a prison, basically, and so they're counted it by the person. So at universities, they'll be enumerated by the university if they're living on campus. Students in the room. If you live in an apartment, which a lot of people will live in an apartment off campus, then a form will come to your home, and you count where you live, basically, not back home with your parents, right? And so there was a big undercount. I think it was something like 40% of students undercounted in the Illinois, the Champaign-Urbana area, basically, because people will not fill it out thinking, well, I'm being counted at home, but you're actually supposed to be counted where you live. And it's similar for people who might be incarcerated. They're counted where they are incarcerated. And that there's been some politics about that, because where you have prisons that are sometimes located in places, and then the numbers go to that area instead of the places where the people are actually from. And so it's a very political issue, but as right now, it's being contested. But basically, people are counted where they are incarcerated, where they are in dormitories. But again, if you're at a university and you're living in an off-campus apartment, you need to be sure to fill out your form and fill it out for living there.
And so what are the plans for social media program and radio resources to expand census turnout? And I want to just add on to that as well. All of those who are in this room are going to help us with that social media messaging. So when people are posting, what are some of your recommendations of making sure that we're posting correct information?
You want to do that one?
So something to note is that the Census Bureau will be investing in digital, air, all sorts of buys across the country. Additionally, what you're going to have, especially in some of the states that are supporting census efforts like Illinois, is potentially buys on that end as well. And one of the things that we'll be doing is also engaging in digital buys. What's very, very important, and some of the guidance that the Bureau is giving, is making sure that when you post about the census and when you're, when you're engaging folks around census, that whatever you distribute out there doesn't look like a survey, or that doesn't look like an intake form that might make people think that they've already filled out the survey through your form. So I know we all have like pledge forms, et cetera. The Bureau is giving very specific guidelines on making sure that it doesn't kind of look like a mock census, because in essence we'd have folks think that they've already filled it out and they haven't. The other piece is making sure that you have accurate and correct sources. So again, the Census Bureau website will be a great resource. Our website will be a great resource. Making folks understand that the census actually starts on March 12th, not on April 1st. March 12th is when folks will start self-responding. The other piece of information is if you do want to do a social media blitz, ballots and you have potential funds to invest towards ad buys, look at doing potential blitz from March all the way until April 30th, which is when we're saying, hey, if you self-respond, the likelihood of an enumerator visiting your home decreases if you self-respond during that time. The other piece to think about is that there are certain tracts who might be receiving the paper form as a first option, in addition to having internet as a choice. There is, if you speak with us after, we can share with you where those specific maps are at, so that you can see in your community specifically who will receive the first option, who will receive the second. The last piece is that for folks who fill it out online, you will have access to up to 12 languages. If you fill it out by paper, it's 2 languages. So it's all of these kind of small details of knowing to make sure that when you're disseminating this information out online, that it's accurate and correct, and that we're not the ones misinforming the community, which sometimes, again, it's not ill-willed, but tends to happen. But the more information you get out there, the merrier. Again, you can talk to us after this session, and I'm happy to share my contact information. We have tons of communications toolkits, social media guides. So wherever possible, no need to reinvent the wheel. We'll probably have it for you.
If I could just add, so from the state perspective, so I sit on the Illinois State Commission, I sit on the county, the city, so I'm all Census, all Illinois, all the time. And I just want to remind everybody, and in fact, Osvaldo Alvarez, who is here from the state census office, we have some U.S. Census Partnership Specialists. So there are a bunch of coalitions here in Illinois, the Illinois Count Me 2020, the county, the city, they all have a bunch of subcommittees, and they're all pushing out tons of toolkits. The Illinois Count Me 2020 coalition has really great resources with messaging already made, and they follow the guidelines of the U.S. Census. So all of those messages are already out there in multiple languages, dealing with issues on confidentiality, hard to count communities, et cetera. Because as, I don't know if many of you know, but Illinois has actually the largest per capita investment across the U.S. Across the U.S. So it's $29 million specific to go out to community-based organizations so that we can get the boots on the ground and be those trusted messages in your community. And so, and we're up to almost $40 million total with all of the county, the city money. So we are really making a huge push because, as Julie mentioned, we had only a 72% response rate in the 2010 census, so we have a ways to go because we're also broke as a state and we really need to bring that money back. So I just want to let you guys know that there's tons of great resources, tons of great advocates here in the audience who already can help you if you want that messaging and those toolkits.
One just final, I'm so sorry, one more thing to add that I completely forgot is if you do flag any bad actors that are disseminating disinformation, Facebook has, we've been working with Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms, and they've asked for folks to report those. So there is a function to report them. If you see any bad actor saying, hey, they're gonna ask you for your immigration status, you know, ICE might come into your community, whatever you see, flag those and report them either to Twitter or Facebook because they will be watching those.
That's great to know. So I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. Okay, so I'm going to kind of merge this. A few people are still continuing to ask about what can we do to dispel this fear that we're having as a Latino community. So I want to make sure that we ask that. And along with that, I'm just going to throw in here, because it goes along with dispelling some myths and rumors. Someone asked, do you have to provide utility receipts? So that's just, I just want to, the reason I asked the question is because I think it's really important to understand that people are really confused and worried, and they have a lot of just misinformation. So so I threw that question in because I want to make sure that we just add that into this overall question of how can we help combat this issue of fear and misinformation.
I think that, well, first, the utility receipts, no, of course, that's not something that you're providing or anything related to your, to citizenship. I think that, my colleagues and I have been doing some research interviewing Latinos about how they feel about government and census, and so we have like interviews we collected in the Chicago area and in the Bay Area in California, and one of the things we noted was, first of all, as people mentioned, people are not very aware of what the census does and what it's for, right? So then, and of course, they've been seeing all this media stuff, and so they've got these fears, and they don't know what's helped in terms of our getting people when they say, well, no, I don't think I want to fill it out. Well, let me tell you a little bit more about it. Telling people that it will matter in terms of the basic representation for their communities and money, all the things that are attached to it, helps people to overcome that and fill it out. And we think that in our interviews, that's been something that's been really, really like useful to explain. And so a lot of people just don't know when we ask people, what do you associate with census? And they're like, I don't know, a tally of people, or they think it's a tally of voters and don't even understand that if you're not voting, you still participate in this, right? So getting people to understand what it's for, I think that's the most useful thing, right? And then assuring people about the fact that their information won't be shared. That's been the thing that's been the most critical. And still, people are still going to be skeptical, et cetera, but those have been the things that have been helped the most in terms of getting people to think that it's important for them to fill out the form. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so what I would add is, it's interesting because we've been doing these train the trainers across the country, and our two most popular slides is what will be on the census and what will not. And so I'm going to repeat it very briefly. What the 2020 census will ask is number of people living or staying in the house, apartment, or mobile home on April 1st, whether their residence is a house, an apartment, or mobile home, telephone number. This is only if the Census Bureau needs to contact you for more information. Sex, age, date of birth, Hispanic origin, race, and relationship to person of reference, which is person number 1 on the form. That is it. And so if nothing else, if you're talking to community members, let them know that these are literally the only things that will be asked. No one will be asking whether, another piece of information that you all should have that we've been noticing through our focus groups is that there's not just fear amongst undocumented immigrants, there's fear amongst Latinos in general, specifically low-income Latinos, because they think, well, what if the city finds out that I converted my garage and my tia lives there now, right? Mm-hmm. So will they share it with the city? Will they share it with, and these are real fears, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's one, and so letting them know that no city agency is going to have access to this. This is literally account for the benefit of the community. The other piece is mixed status families. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we're seeing in our focus groups is that even Latinos who are U.S. citizens and English speaking have a fear to fill out the form and add people in their own household, right? And so it's very important to, again, let them know that when they're filling out the form that their information is confidential, et cetera. The other shift that we've been seeing right now, specifically with our focus groups, is the layering of messaging. So it's really important to say, one, here are the benefits to your community, what is the census, how it benefits your community, how does that information translate into formulas for funding, right? But in a simpler way, not in a nerdy way, like I just said it. And layering that with the importance of power in numbers. This is a shift that we've been seeing with our new focus groups that we just started doing a couple of weeks ago, where Latinos are starting to really feel the sense of empowerment of all of us coming together, specifically when we as trusted messengers tell them that it's so important to make themselves count, because the more of us there are, the more of us, will have power in making sure that we have representation and making sure that we have benefits. And so it's really important to start embracing the fact that we are the second largest population in the country. We're not a minority, right? And so there's kind of this shift in that conversation in our community, and all of you helping us, making them feel empowered to fill out the form. So those are really important things. But again, and if nothing else, if you say, hey, I remember she said these 9 things would be on the form, et cetera, let them know that 877 El Censo is ready to answer their questions, and we can do that for them. But again, the information is very simple, very basic, and we trust on all of you to be our trusted messengers.
Very good. So I'm going to just delve into the last question before we end here. So when I was looking into the last census, I had many heated discussions about the race question and how to answer it. So I'm going to take the liberty to have the last question. And so what I ended up with was identifying myself as Native American mestizo. Native American mestizo, because I am Mexicana, indigenous background. So I want you to just maybe take a few minutes to answer that question and thoughts on that.
Oh, gosh. Well, I think that I wrote a book on this, so I could talk forever, but I will make this very short. I think that, for a lot of people, they don't feel like they fit into the sort of the white, black, and some people will check American Indian, Alaska Native category that you can write in, and you can certainly put in there sort of you are like indigenous Latinos, basically, and put that in there for sure. You can write in, I think that's the thing that sometimes people feel as though, and I would have people, even when I did my interviews, ask, well, can I write something? It says you can write it in, but people don't feel empowered to do that. Write in how you identify yourself on the, you don't feel like you have to pick one of those categories if you don't feel like that fits you, or mark more than one if you feel like that can better do your background. So basically, I think that would be my response. I mean, there have been calls to X out the question or like just don't answer it. The only issue with non-response on that is you increase likelihood of possibly having a follow-up phone call or someone come to your door, right? And they're going to put an answer for you anyway. Like they're going to impute it if you don't answer it. So people don't always understand what imputation is, but basically like they will use the other people in your household or other neighbors who live around you to decide your race for you. So if you don't answer the race question with what you would like it to be on there, it will be answered and it may not be answered in the way that you'd like it to be, right? And so if you would like to put Latino, Mexican American, Puerto Rican, whatever for your race there, check other and write it in. If you don't feel that those other options fit you.
Wonderful. So thank you, panel. Can we get a round of applause for them? High school students, can you raise your hand, please? All of you high school students, raise your hand high. Raise your hand high. Okay. So you leave this room as a trusted messenger for the census. Each one of you are trusted messengers for your community. Thank you so much, and Representative Villanueva is up next.
All right, good morning, everyone. So we're gonna give us a couple minutes so that we can set up this next presentation that Griselda's actually gonna lead us in. Is it this one? Yep. Okay. All right, wonderful. So good morning, everyone. I'm State Representative Selena Villanueva. I represent the 21st District, which is the southwest side of the city of Chicago and the southwest suburbs. That's Little Village, Brighton Park, a little bit of Garfield Ridge, Stickney, Summit, Lyons, parts of Riverside, Cicero, and on and on and on and on. I have a very interesting district, which is really why we're having, and I think why they chose me to have this conversation around redistricting, because my district is a very gerrymandered district. And it is one of the few, if not, I think, the only Latino representative district that is half city, half suburbs. Everyone else is either wholly in the city of Chicago or wholly outside of the city of Chicago, except for Lisa Hernandez. She has a portion of Little Village, but the majority of her district is actually in the suburbs. So I'm about like 45, 55, 50, 50, depending on the census of population in the city and the suburbs. And so this actually, the conversation around census and redistricting has always been very near and dear to my heart. First of all, because I come from Little Village and I'm very proud of it, but second of all, because we've seen the impact that the lack of census numbers plays in terms of political representation. And we've seen this for a very, very long time. And so I'm very happy to have Miguel del Valle and Griselda with us from MALDEF to actually have a deeper conversation around this, because as we're talking about census, we also have to talk about redistricting. And the reason for this being is that Illinois already stands to lose one congressional district. And I think for the past, how many, since the 1950s, 1960s?
1975.
1975, we have officially lost a congressional district every redistricting cycle. And so again, we're in a situation where we're seeing what's happening in Washington, D.C. We obviously have Congressman Garcia, who's going to, I think, joining us, later on during the luncheon hour. And we're seeing what that means play out in real time right now now with impeachment proceedings, because impeachment proceedings are occurring in the House of Representatives. And that is really dependent on population and the number of folks that we have that are represented in the state of Illinois. So we stand to lose a whole congressional district, potentially two. And at this moment, it might be downstate, but it also will, impact Latino communities. Because if you did not know, now you will know there are Latinos in every single county in the state of Illinois.
Yep.
So, yes, we should woo that, because I have some Republican colleagues that I have to continuously remind about that. So with that said, yes, I know, I like to make myself laugh and, entertain myself like that. With that said, I'm gonna actually throw it to Griselda, who's gonna go through this PowerPoint with us. Do you wanna do it from there, or you wanna do it here?
Whatever's easier.
It's up to you.
Okay. Can I just have you, when I say
Yeah.
slide, can you press?
Awesome,
Great.
cool.
Thanks, Representative Villanueva. So again, my name is Griselda, and, and so everything that Selena just said is 100% right. And so this is why this presentation is going to be really important. So go ahead, slide. So I just want to make sure everybody knows. So the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund is a law firm. We're a civil rights law firm. We've been around for 50 years representing the rights of the Latino community. And, our mission is basically to safeguard and protect the rights of the Latino community. So our lawsuit was the lawsuit that got the evidence that was the smoking gun to remove the citizenship question, because we very specifically said, yes, thank you, that this administration was targeting Latinos and was trying to put that question on to make us invisible. And so we are making sure that, and as Lisette said earlier, we want to make sure that people understand that the census is important, but most importantly, that there are organizations like ours that have your back. And we will be there, and we will continue to fight. We have a second lawsuit right now, fighting to make sure that that executive order that came after the citizenship question came off is also challenged, because we don't want that information to be shared, because we think it's the wrong process. So again, the fight continues. I want to take a quick minute of privilege and mention my colleague Stephen Monroy, who's in the audience, our legislative attorney, and once a Maldefian, always a Maldefian, Miss Virginia Martinez. And I don't know, I don't see any other Maldefians. Oh, Barbara's here. Anyway, you guys all know who you are, but MALDEF has been around, and the Chicago office has been around since the 80s. And so, again, we're here to protect your rights. So, redistricting in Illinois, slide. The Latino story, slide again. What is redistricting? So redistricting is simply the process by which the census data, which is what these, Lisette and Julie just mentioned, that critical amount of information is used to crunch the numbers and redraw the lines and the boundaries of all of our electoral districts. Anything from a school board all the way up to our House of Representatives. And so people need to understand the importance of this data, because it is used to divide and conquer, essentially, right? Which leads to political representation and division of resources. So we have to remind everybody why this is so important. It's not just a tally of how many people are here. It is, but to the end of making sure that we are representative, that we have a voice. Slide. So I just want to mention some really key redistricting dates and why this all sort of ties together. So we have the census, right? Census Day on April 1st, 2020, and then they're going to crunch all that information, and the first sort of slew of information that gets pushed out is in January 2021, where they reapportion the U.S. House of Representatives. And then everything after that, because then the information gets to the states, and then the states take their shot at using that information to, again, redraw all of these lines that I just mentioned. So again, it's all connected. And so that's one of the reasons this panel is so great, because this is why we're all sitting up here together. Slide. And why is that important to us and to our political representation? This is why. Because back in 1980, we actually had none, and then we went and were able to get our first 3 Latinos that held office back in Illinois, right? 2 were only Cook County officials, and only 1 was two Cook County officials, and then one a Democratic Party official. So we had 3. At that point, we had no one in the General Assembly, we had no one elected to Congress, and there were no majority Latino wards in the entire, with all of the population that was there. So there was very little Latino presence, right? And so, yeah, that was back in the 1980s. So what happened? We had to file lawsuits, right? Slide. So this is the progress. I hope that's the graph with the colors.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is, and I know it's hard to read, but I want to point out that all of the blue is the Latino population in the total state. Okay, see how much we've grown from the 1980s to 2018? The red or orange, depending on how that shows up, that is the number of state representatives as a percentage of all state reps. So back in 1980, we had 1, and now in 2018, you see the bar has gone up to 7, almost 8% with 9 reps. The green is our state senators. So that is the percentage of all state senators that are Latino, right? So again, we had 1 in 1980, and now we're up to 5. So is it progress? Absolutely. But that's also reflective of why this is going to be so important, because as I think it was Lisette who just said, right? We are the largest, we are no longer a minority. So if we've got the numbers, we have to be able to be counted so that this bar gets bigger. Okay, slide.
This is why I like moderating with Griselda, because she's so passionate.
I know. We're also a dangerous combination.
Yes, we are.
But now I want to give you guys a little bit of history, and I'm really honored and privileged to be up here with Senator Miguel del Valle, because not only have I been a fangirl for a very long time, but he was our plaintiff in some of this litigation that has led to these changes. So as you guys see up there, that's the 4th Congressional District, right? What we like to call the earmuff district, and it's been the only Latino congressional district we've had for a very long time, but we had to fight to get to that point, right? And so the 2 lawsuits that you see up there were how we got there, right? So Hazard was the very first one that got us that congressional district, and while it is, you could, from the technical term, there's this technical term called gerrymandering, right? Which is that you sort of draw the line to fit what you're trying to get to, and while that may be true, at least in this context, it holds up in court because we needed it for the purpose of making sure that it is up to, the state had such a compelling interest to make sure that we were represented. And that is why this remains to date, right? Now, that's not to say that there wasn't challenge, because that's what happened with the King litigation. Obviously, they were like, wait, that looks like you guys, moved around the lines to try to get to where you wanted to go, but the state said, no, we need to make sure that the Latinos have that voice. The problem with that is we are growing, and we've grown, and so what is that gonna look like, right? So if you can go to the next slide. So how is that sort of more locally? And the reason we like to bring up the Del Valle litigation, obviously, and I'll ask Senator to sort of share a little bit about his thoughts, and Virginia, if she has anything to add, because this is important, because this is how we got the first state senator, right? We needed to say, because back then, what had happened was they had started they were redrawing lines. They weren't able to do that. They appointed a commission. The commission was like, we're going to create and draw these lines, and the lines were all wonky. And we were like, and so they're like, their position was, well, they look like they're sort of like a snowsuit, because we're looking to future growth of the Latino community, and so that's why they look so weird. And it's like, what kind of logic is that? So anyway, so MALDEF sued, and we said, no, you've got to draw these lines so that they actually reflect who we are and where we are, and not just necessarily sort of potentially where we're going to go, because they basically had split where the majority of the population was at the time. So we won, and that led to the first state rep, and that led to our first state senator, Miguel del Valle. Now, part part of what we wanted to do and share with you was really, and every time I'm on a panel or we talk about this with the senator, he has always such great insights about sort of why this is so important, because he's been fighting this entire time, and we stand on the shoulder of giants, and had it not been for his advocacy and the advocacy of Virginia and a ton of advocates for this entire time, we wouldn't be here. And so every time he, we share the stage and he has all this insight, I wanted to make sure, and we wanted to make sure that you had that as well. So I just sort of want to share, or I want to pass it to the senator and have you share some insights on that process and sort of, how we got here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, particularly given all the young people who are here, the high school students and others, and college students. I think it's important that they know this history, because we need to build on it. We are far from where we should be in terms of parity, proportional representation. There's still a lot of unrealized potential.
Yep.
And so it's up to all of us to continue to push and to advocate to make sure that we can increase our representation. And going back, and I was involved, I'm counting here, this would be my 5th census. Me estoy poniendo viejo.
No más en números, but not in heart.
But in 1980, in the early 80s, when Virginia was the director of MALDEF and Rey Romero was working with Virginia, at that time I was executive director of Association House in the West Town area. And they called me up, and Ray came over to the office on North Avenue and to ask me if I would be willing to be part of this court case. And he used the word gerrymandering. I didn't know what the hell that meant. He talked about reapportionment. I didn't know what that meant. He talked about the census. Even though I was executive director of a community agency, I never thought about the census. But when he talked to me about how I knew the neighborhood, and they needed someone who knew the neighborhoods, who was familiar with the spread of the population in the area, when he said that, I said, oh yeah, I could do that. And so after he left, I went to the dictionary and started looking up all these words. I mean, the true story. And I agreed to do it because it was about the neighborhoods. It was about Latinos. And so I went, and I remember the day that I was with Virginia in the federal courtroom, and as I was leaving, Virginia introduced me to Mike Madigan. That's how long Madigan has been around. And because we were there challenging his map. We were challenging the Democrats' map because, of course, the whole redistricting process has always been primarily about protecting incumbents. The people with the power want to keep the power. And the only way they are willing, and I shouldn't say use the word willing because they're never willing, the only way they're forced to relinquish some of that power, to share some of that power, is through this type of action. That's the only way we were able to do it. So whether it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, the doors weren't open for us. We had to crash those doors open, and we had to do it through litigation. And so that is what led to the election of the first Latino to the Illinois House of Representatives in 1982, soon after that case was solved. And then in 86 is when I ran. I had no intentions of running for office. I was a community activist, an advocate. I was convinced that the only way to improve things in our community was through organizing and beating up on politicians. So I had no intentions of becoming one. But through that process, through the redistricting process, I became educated. I realized how important it was to us. And I remember when I was at the Boys and Girls Club, Barreto Boys and Girls Club, organizing a block cleanup with our kids, and having the state senator from the area stop by because his precinct captain told him to stop by because he had paid for the hot dogs. And that's when I met the state senator from the area for the first time. I had no idea who he was. And that's the individual that I ended up running against and beating. But during that process, not only were we creating opportunities at the state level, we were also looking at the congressional district with the census. And that's how we created the 4th Congressional District. And Luis Gutierrez, who had run against Rostenkowski for committeeman, and it was like David versus Goliath, really set the stage for that, for the election of the first Latino congressman in the history of the state of Illinois. And that was also as a result of the creation of that earmuff district that a lot of people thought wouldn't withstand a challenge, and it did. And at the city council level, it's when in Chicago we elected the first Latino alderman. And all through that process, those with the power wanted to ensure that if Latinos won these battles, redistricting battles, whether at the state level or congressional level or at the ward level, that then if they're gonna be Latinos elected, then let it be our Latinos. That's what the party said. We want el dedazo. We want to say,
Yep.
this is how it's going to be. But there was an independent, progressive spirit across the state when these districts were created that galvanized a lot of folks in the community who had not been politically active before, and they came in and made sure that it wasn't totally controlled by the party. But after that, then we had 1990 come around, and again, MALDEF played a key role, because for the first 6 years of that, at the end of the 80s and in the 90s, there was only one Latino in the Illinois Senate and just a couple in the House. And we knew that there would be another opportunity with the Senate. By that time, I understood really the importance of the census. And so we were able to fight a battle, but this time we're on the inside. And in the legislature, we were able to create political pressure to make sure, along with the threat of MALDEF and MALDEF going to court again, we were able then to add a second state senator to the Illinois General Assembly, and that second state senator was Jesus Garcia, who became the first Mexican-American to then go to the Illinois Senate. And then subsequent to that, in 2000, another opportunity. We stuck together and we fought and we forced the party, Mike Madigan again, he's been involved with every single round since I started, we forced them to create, and by that time, we were not only demanding the creation of districts, we were actually at the table with the computers drawing maps and drawing boundaries. So we went from not knowing what the hell it was all about to actually being there and drawing boundaries and having our districts mapped out first. That's how we ended up with the Senate district, Chewy's Senate district being number 1.
Yep.
The one in my district was number 2, because our districts were drawn first. Because by that time, the Democratic Party and Mike Madigan and others said, we don't want to have to do battle with MALDEF in the courts. And so let's see how we can work this out. And so as a result of that, we got 2 more state Senate districts, and we went from 2 to 4, and then this last time around, we were fortunate in having Senator Castro elected, the first senator,
Yeah, Latina senator in the
Latina
suburbs.
senator, not the first Latina, Iris
the
Martinez,
suburbs.
but the first Latina senator in the suburbs.
Yep.
And today, we're at 4. But in between that time, there were other battles that were fought as a result of the use of the census and the redistricting process. I formed a coalition with African-American legislators, and we fought, and we were successful. It's a long story. I won't get into it, but we were successful in creating the Cook County judicial subcircuits. Hilda Frontani knows. And it was for the purpose of making sure that we could take the total control that the party had of selecting judges and give the communities an opportunity to elect judges of their choice. And as a result of that, today, not only in Cook County, but counties, King counties, Lake County, other counties throughout the state, we have been able to elect more Latino judges, more women judges, and judges of other ethnicities as a result of that fight. And that was also a fight that was taking place in the General Assembly that would not have occurred if we didn't have African American and Latino legislators in the General Assembly. Now, I want to end my part with this because we want to get to questions. The last time around, the last census, 2010, we had an opportunity in Springfield to increase our representation through the redistricting process. What happened? There was no case brought by MALDIF, even though I felt that we could have done that. But also, we had community organizations that ended up basically signing off on early maps that really didn't maximize our opportunities for increasing representation. And at that time, I said, we're kind of victims of our own success. Because when we had nothing, we fought like hell, and we made things happen, and we were united. And as a result of that, things happened. We had more opportunities. Then all of a sudden you have funding coming from Springfield to build charter schools in communities in the Latino community, and you have other human service providers getting money, and you have other folks being lined up. And the powers that be, the most powerful people in Springfield, were basically able to line folks up. And on top of that, and I say this in a respectful manner, you had Latino legislators, some Latino legislators, who were primarily concerned about keeping their districts and keeping their bound. So therefore, we were victims of our own success. And hopefully, that will not happen in this next round. Because I can, without getting into the numbers of the districts or the particular areas, there are areas right now, not just in the Chicago area and Cook County, but outside Cook County, areas right now where we can elect Latinos. We can. And not just at the state level, but at the local level. So whether you're talking about Aurora or you're talking about Lake County and Waukegan, lots of areas where we should have representation, and I'm not just talking about the municipal government level, but we mentioned school boards. School board elections. You know, where school board elections throughout the state, we have 850 school districts, and we have school board elections where the turnout for those elections is usually about 11, 12%. And you have areas with lots of Latinos where there aren't Latino representatives on these school boards, and yet these school boards are making decisions regarding referenda on the ballot for school construction or for instruction, and those referenda go down because Latinos aren't participating. And yet their children, the Latino children, are directly affected by the decisions the school board makes. And so when we talk about redistricting and we talk about the census, we're not just talking about state reps or state senators. We're talking about positions for judges, for school boards, for county boards, all these districts. Chicago has more units
Of government.
Almost 7,000 units of government than any other place in the country. And many of those units of government are governed by positions that are elected. And so the census affects all of that. Representation across the board, and that's why it's so important for us to make sure that every person gets counted. And it's important for us, in closing here, that we be united throughout the entire state. We can't have divisions, and we can't allow for those who control the process, whether it be the Senate President and the Speaker of the House, or those who are involved with the congressional, we can't allow them to divide us and peel us off and have us thinking that somehow we can settle for maps that do not maximize our opportunities for representation. Thank you.
So we're gonna,
Last slide.
this is why I like hanging out with Miguel del Valle, because it's always a history lesson, but it's always like pointers of like, okay, now I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna let Griselda finish off really quickly, and then we'll get into the question portion of things. So if you need pieces of paper, or if you have questions, please fill them out, because then we'll go really quickly into Q&A.
Sure, and my last slide is really what Miguel just said, right? What are you guys sitting in the audience, what can you do? So obviously the very first one is, as Lisette and Julie already just talked about earlier, you guys are now ambassadors, and you are now trusted messengers in your communities with your friends, your family, anyone that you talk to about the importance of census, because I hope that if you've learned anything today is that we must fill out the census, because it affects so many daily decisions and so many things that happen in our lives that we have to raise our voice, and that everybody counts. This isn't just a U.S. citizens. This isn't just people who are legally here. It is everybody, because if we just heard the history lesson, our voice is what gets us our representation. And so to allow that to happen, every single person must be counted, including babies, including our elderly, and everyone in between. So go out, learn more about the census. There's tons of great resources out there. You just heard about a bunch this morning, and make sure you get engaged. There's going to be tons of activities happening leading up to the census. And then after the census is all said and done, what's going to happen? Redistricting. And when redistricting starts happening, it will come very quickly, and it will happen just at the blink of an eye. So become educated, engage your local officials, and make sure that you ask questions, and ultimately think about running for office. As Miguel just said, there are so many positions in your local community that you can get involved so that our voice can be heard. So with that, I will turn it back over to.
So I actually want to take a point of personal privilege, because I'm on the House floor all the time, to really kind of describe a situation that Miguel actually talked about in terms of redistricting and maps. So every district has a number. I represent the 21st district. Aaron Ortiz, who's in the background, and I'm calling him out because he's a prime example of what we're talking about in terms of incumbents holding on to power, represents the 1st House district. The 1st House district for the past 26 years, before Aaron became representative at 26, was held on by one Dan Burke, the younger brother of Ed Burke, the longest serving alderman in the city council, who is also under investigation by the federal government. And the reason why I bring this up is because when Aaron was born, this man got into power to represent this district. And while it didn't always look the same every cycle, what ended up happening in the last remap, which was in 2011, because it happens the year after the census, which was in 2010, this was the first map that was drawn because it's the 1st district. This was an incumbent who had been in office for 26 years. Now, for the young people in the audience, think about the people who are in elected positions and represent you on different levels of government and how long they've been in those seats. Now think about being 26 and having the same person more or less probably represent you in the state house for 26 years, and an individual who doesn't look like your neighborhood. Because the southwest side of the city of Chicago, for anybody that knows, is what now? Exactly, very heavily Latino, and growing more so every day, so much so that in my suburban communities is a lot of Mexican people. And so we see that, and that's a prime example what we're talking about, and that's being brought up in terms of the holding onto power, but then also what's happening at this moment, because back in 2010, we didn't have this solid coalition of people that were going into the census saying we're all gonna work together to make sure that our people get counted, and then we're going to work together to make sure that our communities, and I'm speaking as an elected official, as a state representative, but I'm also speaking as an organizer, that our communities are the ones that are going to be represented on these different levels of government in the way that they should be represented. Because another issue that we see as well is on very local levels of government, where we should have, because of population, we should have more wards in the city of Chicago that are represented by Latinos. We should have more House districts that are represented by Latinos, but we don't, because we're gerrymandered, because neighborhoods and communities are cut into different areas. One prime example is the Back of the Yards neighborhood that is cut into about, what, 4 different wards in the city of Chicago, if not 5, I think. And that happened in this last redistricting, but it's always been that case. And Back of the Yards being a very low-income community that is very, very resource deprived. So when we're talking about like things, this is the tangible outcomes of what happens from redistricting. And I wanted to throw the question, and I like putting Aaron on blast all the time, because that's my homie. But I wanted to throw the question to Griselda and Miguel, what are the other tangible things that we're talking about that come from redistricting? Because obviously we're talking about the census. After the census and after the numbers comes the redistricting, because it's, you know, divvying up the maps. But what tangible things are we talking about in terms that redistricting directly impacts? Miguel, you talked about it in terms of like school boards, in terms of representation, but what other things are we really talking about?
Well, again, I hate to be the history teacher here, but
No, we love it. We love it. Did we not love this?
but
Exactly.
no, but representation leads to, especially at the legislative level, always leads to resources. It leads to resources because you're in a position to be able to advocate and work, and yes, make deals to acquire the resources. Representation also leads to more opportunities to provide leadership. This foundation sponsoring this conference was created by us, by the legislature. And every year, scholarships are awarded to students, undocumented students. The private sector responds to the appeals of the foundation to help students. And so there are resources that are acquired as a result of the structures that are created, the advocacy that is put into place, the legislation that is passed that makes things happen. It was legislation that created the opportunities to have more judges on the bench. We have people who have become judges as a result of that district creation. And so they make decisions on the bench that affect our community directly. Everything is connected, you know. And when it comes to using census numbers to distribute federal funding, for example, whether it's Medicaid or other kinds of programs, or even Title I funds for our schools in our school district, if you have representation there, then you can work to make sure that there is a fair distribution and that our population is not invisible to the decision makers at the local level. You use, and folks, that is not to say that every single Latino elected official who has been elected since the opportunities were created has done that. You see, you know, and that's why we are at a point now, and you see it unfolding with elections that result in fine representatives like our moderator here. But we are at a point now, I think, where we could not just look at the number of Latino elected officials, but the quality as well. And we are at a point where we have choices too, where we have multiple candidates, Latinos running for the same seat. And so that's progress. That is progress, because when I first started, Latinos who went to vote were looking for the Latino name on the ballot. Oh, ¿por qué votaste por ese? Oh, porque era el único nombre latino en la papeleta.
Thank you.
And that's still true. People look for that Latino name. That's true. But before Latinos, you know, people would make sure that their name was Irish sounding. So that they could get elected in Chicago. And so this is nothing new. But we have evolved. We are much more sophisticated today in general as a population. And our young people are looking at, you know, with social media and the communications that take place, people are more selective, let's say, and that's a good thing, because we need those strong advocates to use the levers of government that lead to change, social change, positive change, and those levers are not only affecting governmental decisions, those levers also affect private sector decisions. It affects our economy, our overall economy. It affects our standing. When in Springfield, they argue about, as they did recently, about minority representation on corporate boards, you know, that argument would not have taken place 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and yet it's taking place now. That creates the kind of climate that leads to change. And it's all about creating climate, and all of us doing our part to feed into that, and no one feeling powerless, no one feeling that, oh, what difference can I make? I'm only one person. Yes, it makes a big difference. And so resources distribution, in response to your question, resource acquisition and resource distribution are the main reason why the census leading to redistricting is so important, because it positions us to be able to influence in a positive way those decisions.
The only thing, I think, obviously 100% agree. The only other thing I would add is also, not only does the census data help sort of, you know, we're talking about the representation and political power, but that information actually also helps businesses, right? Businesses depend on that information, because that is why there are food deserts. That is why you don't have the fancy grocery store or the nice little coffee shops in your hometown, in your neighborhood. And so all of those things also open opportunities, because while some of our community doesn't want to do the political thing, they want to do the private thing, right? They want to open their own restaurants, they want to open their own whatever shop. All of that is done because we have a good census data that then also leads to representation that allows for that to foster, right? And so to give people the opportunity to be able to do what they want to do. I mean, my parents left Mexico to come and give us an opportunity. And so I'm sure that that is why we're all here. And so to be given that opportunity means that someone who looks like you is going to push for you and advocate for you and your community, right? And, you know, on a very local level, we, you know, MALDEF does education cases, and we keep getting questions about how even things about the decisions about how many bilingual ed teachers are in your classroom, whether they're even teaching bilingual ed. I mean, that's the law law, and we as lawyers, that's what we fight for, but what does it really, is that what's happening in practice? And nobody knows that because the local school board is sending money to do something else, right? And so those are the decisions that are affecting the future, our future. And so you have a voice and a possibility to change that. And so that's why all of this is important, from a very sort of localized perspective to being a state senator or a congressman.
So I'm gonna actually, I got an idea. I think I'm gonna have a podcast with Miguel del Valle so he can just give me history lessons. And then I can go strategize. We're just gonna have to do that. I'm just saying. I think it would be very successful. And then Griselda, you can actually co-host with me. See, look. All right. So we got a couple of really good questions. We have a couple about census stuff, and I'll try to end with those. But I wanted to bring this up because this was a really good one, and the next one is as well. What about the issue of fair maps? Because I know that there's a coalition of folks that are out there that are working on the issue of fair maps. And the efforts that the League of Women Voters are actually working on. What are your opinions on what's going on?
So, I can only speak for MALDEF. So obviously for us, we're a Latino law firm, right? So our position is we are open to looking at that possibility, as long as there's a, as long as the manner in which those representatives are chosen allow for the opportunity to have equal representation, right? So if it's an 8-member panel, there better be some Latinos on there. So to me, it's in the fine details, right? I mean, I think the concept makes sense. It's been done across the country. It's just, and so MALDEF is a national agency. Oh, I'm sorry, Fair Maps. So there's this coalition that's out there, and so, we just talked about how to draw the maps, and that essentially the history here has been that it's been really politicized, right? It's the powers that be that sort of divide and redraw. So the idea is that there would be this commission, an elected commission, that would decide fairly how those lines are drawn. That's essentially in a nutshell. So it's been done in other states, and what I was going to say is, so MALDEF is a national agency. We have offices in California, DC, San Antonio, et cetera. And I always have to fight and be like, Chicago, the Illinois and the Midwest office is not like California and Texas and DC. We are very unique. And so even if it's worked in California or anywhere else, it doesn't mean that given our history, which we've just heard, that process is going to be fair and representative. And so for me, for us, it's going to be about the details. How are we gonna elect people? Who's gonna pick it? It's all of those really fine details, and we have yet to sort of see that. So until that happens, I wouldn't say, I'm not in a position to sort of say yes or no. But I would also say to you that when you hear about this information, ask a lot of questions, right? Because we wanna make sure that whatever the process is, that we have a voice.
Okay, I have 2 census questions, because this last question is actually a really good question that I want to throw to everybody. So the 2 census questions: should I be receiving an invitation, or how will I know when I can fill out the census online before someone knocks on my door? And then the other question is, what are some of the steps that I can take to host a forum on the census?
Okay.
So online before someone knocks on my door, and then forum on the census.
Okay. The postcards are going to start coming to your mail on March the 12th. I think it's March the 12th. So the postcard will come, and there will be like 4 attempts at written, basically postcard, mail, basically that you're going to receive, giving you like the code to be able to go on and enter in your code for your household to be able to do that. And then if you do not respond to those prompts that you're going to receive in the mail, then an actual paper form will come. And so you'll know because you'll receive this from the Census Bureau. And I think as Lisette mentioned too, this is also, there's, fears that someone could use fake sort of stuff and send out information. So you'll know, I think the important thing in messaging, tell people what really is going to be on the census and that it needs to come from the Census Bureau, because there's official sort of documentation that will be on that it's from the Census Bureau, and to look for that, to know how to do that. Do you want to address the second part?
Yes. Okay. And one other thing, the form, the letter will have a unique ID. However, if folks lose it, they misplace it, they can still fill out the form online. So it's really important to let them know. In terms of hosting a town hall, I'm going to do a quick plug because I'm actually going to be with Representative Garcia's office tomorrow at La Raza Se Prepara para el 2020 at St. Paul Church. And so we're going to start doing some stuff there since I'm in town. But I would suggest partnering up with your elected officials, your members of Congress, your state legislators, your city council members that you want to make sure do this work. I know across the country there's various cities, there's various counties, and then there's various state agencies that are wanting to do town halls. So instead of trying to do this by yourself, figure out what are the local coalitions that you can do this work through. The second piece is bringing in your Spanish language media partners or your ethnic media partners to make sure that they're actively promoting the town hall. And what you want to make sure and do is add a little bit of the empowerment piece that we talked about around the importance for Latinos, a little bit of what we talked about in terms of representation and the benefits, but also add in very specific information as to how they will get counted. When do the letters come? What will the letters say? Where can they get assistance? And in essence, those tidbits, because that is where we're seeing the misinformation or the lack of information. And again, if you need any resources, we will be around for the next couple of minutes, and I'm happy to send that to you all as well.
Griselda, you had something?
Yeah, so I just want to add that specific to Illinois, so as I mentioned, right, there's the state, which is, Osvaldo's around here somewhere. So the state handed out $20 million to what they call regional intermediaries, and basically these are these big agencies that are then going to work with sub-recipients, so more different community organizations, et cetera, and then they're going to be able to continue to push out money into the community. All that information is online, so they're very well, and the list of subrecipients will be coming out shortly, so you can go there and find out who in your backyard is actually has census money, and they will likely be pushing out a ton of different activities and and all kinds of organized forums. MALDEF's been doing sort of a dog and pony show with a bunch of the representatives, state senators, local senators, so we've been really supportive of all of these different efforts. So there are over, I think it's the last count was there was almost 200 local complete count commissions across the state. So there may very well be one in your backyard, because they can be as small as a couple organizations to like a very state official commission, and they're all planning tons of census activities. So there's a lot of really great resources. IDHS, I think it's census2020.gov, Illinois Census.
There will be, you can actually get more information at the Census Central in the ballroom, Jay. So I'll plug that in a little bit.
Great. And I also most of you should have gotten a brochure. It's got the State Commission website and information, and you can always go there, because what we're also trying to do is make sure that they're all connected so that you don't have to go looking in different places, but that they're all coordinated and you can really find information in the various sections. So I just want to make that plug.
All right, we're going to end with this last question, because my stomach is already growling and I didn't eat breakfast. And this is a good one. As a high schooler, how can I put myself in a position where I can have a voice and make an impact within my community? In case we didn't need to get more theoretical about things and really into the heart of it, there we go.
Just get involved with an issue, get involved with a community organization, get involved with an advocacy effort, connect to an effort, whether it's in school, that's going to give you an opportunity to contribute and at the same time develop your leadership skills. My first organizing effort and experience was in high school, and it was around the issue of the conduct of a teacher that we were, as Latino students, very upset with. We won the battle, but more importantly for me is that it gave me my first organizing experience. And when you win a battle as a result of organizing, whether you're with a community organization, you begin to feel that sense of empowerment that sets the stage for future battles. And so high school is a great place to get connected with something that you're passionate about, that you care deeply about. And I say that because if you care deeply about it, you're going to put yourselves into it, you're going to put your energy, you're going to put everything into it, and it's going to result in a life-changing experience.
Yeah.
Just to briefly add, just think about the fact that most of us up on this panel came from communities like yours, and we just decided to be bold, to step up, and to never wait our turn. And so I would just say, you know, all of us as organizers in our own way are waiting on you as the next generation, you know, no pressure. But we know that your generation has been one of, yeah, all the pressure in the world. Your generation has been one of the boldest, has been one of the loudest, and has been one of the generations to bring the most change around climate issues, around gun control issues. So we have all the faith in you, but again, be bold, never be silent, and never wait your turn.
There you go.
Yes. All right. I really wanted to end with that question because I think that really culminates in why we're all doing this and why we're obviously participating in this. Because at the end of it all, this is about building power, not just for us in the now, but in the future. So I did want to end up with a couple things. So if you have more questions, particularly around Census, Census Central is happening in Ballroom J. And so we have the U.S. Census 2020. We have the State Census 2020 folks. We have regional intermediaries as well as the folks from Cook County 2020 and the Latino Policy Forum. So that's in Ballroom J. I'd like to take a moment to thank our panelists again. These incredible people doing this incredible work. My co-moderator, Representative Karina Villa, and have a good day and enjoy the rest of the sessions.